Greetings all. Welcome to Cultural Studies in Focus. Today with us we have Dr. Nicole Plummer, Dr. Dennis Howard, Dr. Sonia Stanley Nayak, and myself, Melissa Bedford Simpson, your host. In this episode, we are looking at culture and violence in schools. Now, as far as we can remember, there has been some amount of violence in our society, and we have seen in recent times an uptick in this violence, and particularly we are seeing this in schools. One way or the other, whether it is student on student violence or student with teacher, there is some amount of violence. So what is causing this? We want to discuss all of these issues today as much as we can as cultural studies researchers and practitioners. We would like to give our perspectives on what are the reasons, what are some of the possible solutions. How can we approach both from an individual and community level as well as from a governmental level, from policy level. So at this time, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to take just 3 minutes and to give us your opening statements in terms of your perspective as a researcher, your angle as a researcher. How do you see violence, this culture of violence in schools? Beginning with you, Dr. Nayak.
Thank you very much, Melissa. I think this is a really important topic. One of the things as a department in the University of West Indies that we always want to do is to stay ahead of discussions happening in public and to drive how those discussions can in fact happen. But where violence is concerned, one has to position that in a historical context, that an understanding of what's happening in a contemporary moment, whether it is manifesting in schools, whether it is manifesting in the workplace, in the homes, on the streets, is to understand that there is a historical basis for the kind of violence that we're seeing. And that has to do with a history of slavery and colonialism, that this society was born out of violence, and that where truth and reconciliation is concerned, from the colonial experience into the peasantry, into what is now this contemporary society, we have not dealt with our past in any real way. So what does that produce? That produces a context in which you don't even have a basis on which to deal with violence, much less things like anger management, conflict resolution. So when we are faced with challenges, arguments, disagreements in the home, any kind of conflict in the street, in the school, the opportunities, the available skills, the strategies to reduce how conflicts can escalate, those strategies we're not even dealing with it. So in a context such as Jamaica, what we would need to have as a routine basis in terms of training and capacity building and proposing is anger management. So I've gone to some of the solutions. So I understand that our society is one where we are seeing increased violence. Now, let me also say that if it is that the examples that we see in the society are not helping us to understand how to reduce conflict, so whether it is in the parliament, whether it is even in the context of international news, we're seeing more and more and more examples of people in high places in conflict.
Indeed, indeed. We are going to come back to you because I want to hear your perspective on a very controversial matter for a very long time. And that relates to your particular area of research in terms of dancehall and performance and so on. But I want to hear the opening statements from the other panelists. So I'm sure Dr. Plummer will agree with the historical angle, yes, of course. So let's hear yours, Dr. Plummer.
I completely agree with Sonia, and I was going to take it also from the historical angle, but I want to just add a little bit more on the history angle. Jamaica was forged on a business culture whose sole objective was to make money. And as a result, violence was a key part of the characteristic that was used to just maintain control and promote the success of the colony. Now, when you look at how that violence was supported by the system, you're looking at a legal model that's the slave laws that supported violence against black bodies. But even before there were slave laws, there were what you consider indenture laws for indentured servants, itself also very violent. When you came on to the enforcement of the violence on the plantation, Jamaican enslaved workers were expected to work for a product that brought them no interest, and so the result of that is you get extremely graphic in terms of the kind of punishment needed to ensure that they labored. Now, how all of this translated as, of course, is that even in black to black relationships, replete through reports in diaries by Thomas Thistlewood, was black on black violence, right? So that element of mimicking the violence that white masters put onto to black bodies was also ended up being something that black to black also enforced. Then it was also in terms of parenting, while we know for certain that black mothers and fathers, evince quite a bit of love towards their children, we can't ignore the fact that in preparing their children for what was going to be an excruciatingly painful and horrible toxic environment was that some of the enforcement of discipline at home was rough. It was very physically rough on the children. In fact, even from the day they were born, they came into a hostile environment. Children were brought into the field where they saw their mothers hurt, their mothers at night being brutalized.
Right.
And so in all of that, and then don't forget as well, there was this aspect of it that Trevor Bernard looks at, which was how even the black male within the context of the family was expected to control not just his female partner, but the children through any means necessary. So violence even within the family. Right? And when you look at some of the reports, for example, I was looking at a report from a peasant woman, black peasant woman after enslavement, visiting Kingston. And one of her comments was, "Oh my goodness, they're going to knock me over my head and steal my things." So that kind of violence now, and that utilization of black bodies for income was pathologized. And so what you find is that people of African descent, instead of me looking and seeing the inherent humanity in you, Melissa, part of the pathology of our historical legacy is that I see you and I see gold around your neck and the earring, and I think I can take that from you and I don't care.
So what I'm hearing then is that there is a subliminal way that we have taken this onto ourselves. It is something that we possibly do without even understanding clearly or being very cognizant of it all the time, because it is indeed not just culture and violence, but it is a culture of violence in schools.
And I wouldn't put it as take it onto ourselves. I would say that it's something that was forced upon us, and to survive that violence, it became part and parcel of the environment, and if we're not conscious, we replicate it. And that is what I would say. If we're not conscious, we replicate.
Indeed. And very good examples there from our history in terms of how it is that this has been passed on. So I would like to hear from you now, Dr. Howard, in terms of your perspective on this.
So taking up from where Dr. Plummer left off, she said, if we're not careful, we'll replicate it, but we are replicating it. That's the problem, and Jamaica, based on our constitution and the colonial law that are still in place, is based on violence against its people, because we are still considered by the colonial powers less than. And so I did some research recently on a particular topic, and I was combing through the Gleaner, and this is from in the 40s and the 50s. And what stood out to me separate from what I was looking at, was the level of violence that was reported in the Gleaner. And I'm looking at it: stabbing, guns, even in the 40s and 50s, the amount of gun crimes and stabbing and rapes, and it was among ourselves in terms of the working class black people of the country. And it was amazing. So we have had this culture of violence. We have corporal punishment, where in the schools everybody, some of us know kind of what's the word? Talk about it in glorious terms. Like my high school that I came from, we used to talk about a vice principal who we used to call him. He used to give us cane juice and Bruce's patty because of his name and the association with Bruce's patty and using a cane. And so we talk about it in almost loving terms, that we used to get caning from Mr. Bruce. But we don't. But in hindsight, when I don't look back at Mr. Bruce as being evil, it is about how the society was set up, and almost like a situation where the hegemony of the situation, that you accept that you must get beaten. And so
and come to expect it.
And come to expect
and
it.
not only that, I'm sure you've heard of stories where everyone talking about the community raise a child. It was always the teacher beat the child, and then on the way home, this person beat the child. And you come home, like almost every neighbor beats you, and then you get home. And it was like,
I can tell you many stories of that, going to the shop and idling on the road, and Miss Brown beat me and sent me home because I should not be idling on the road. So we could tell many stories literally, and listen to this from MPhil Philip. Because indeed, that story of MPhil Philip is a real story. And we say it all the time, we use it as just an expression. But it is another example of how the language that we use each day, almost along what you were saying, we are glorifying the violence in this way. So we have agreed that historically, we can see where this is coming from. We have all agreed to that. And from my perspective as a researcher about, how it is that we air our grosses, how it is that we say what we have to say, it is coming from the same history of having to always, resist. There's always some kind of violence that is involved, because first of all, we do not necessarily feel as if we will get a redress without there being some violence involved. And so or what I like to call a culture of protesting, of blocking the roads, block roading, in order for the government to tell us something, for somebody in authority to say what needs to happen. And so we see this in the society, and that is what unfortunately, we're seeing. The school is a microcosm of what is happening in the society. So we want to zero in on what's happening in the schools now. And we have seen many incidents recently. A 17-year-old Kingston Technical High School female student who was fatally stabbed at school. That was just last year, 2022. And we have seen another one at Green Pond High. A male student was stabbed and killed by another student. A 16-year-old student at the Tivoli Gardens High School was charged after assaulting a 56-year-old senior teacher. So this is now student and teacher. A male teacher from the Newell High School verbally assaulted and threatened. And here's another incident of that. And 2 students captured on video at Pembroke Hall School fighting. And all of these things with social media now, everybody knows what's happening. So we see the videos going around. So from each of your perspectives now, what are some of the reasons behind these particular incidents that we're seeing in the schools? Schools
have become holding cells. You're talking about some structures that are primarily concrete. In the 70s and the early 80s, most of these structures had louver windows. Now they have decorative tiles, so that there's no kind of air coming into the classrooms. There is a situation where the students are coming, a lot of them coming from areas and situations where they are exposed to violence. Once the school was a haven for these people, it's not anymore, because the schools, the classrooms are crowded. When I was in school, it was 25 of us. Now it's 50, same space, and no effort has been made to improve the quality and the environment of the schools. So what youth, and then there are some colonial rules being implemented about strict dress code, hairstyle, and all
For
kinds.
certain ethnic groups.
Precisely.
Thank you. Yes, because there's, and that's part of the frustration.
Yes.
Because some other people in the same school are given the allowance to be, so them hair can grow and they can dress how they want
But
to
we
dress.
have deans of discipline in the schools. We have deans of discipline in most of the schools.
I want to jump in. I want to jump in
Yes.
on that Dean of Discipline conversation. And I want to have us, in a sense, abstract ourselves a little bit into a wider social context to get back to the schools. When you have a police force that, in order to enforce the law, is that individual has to break the law, the very laws that they're enforcing.
That's right.
When a policeman has to use an expletive to somebody that they're going to arrest, it means that there is something very wrong with the society.
There is.
And I use that as an example to say that we are living in a context where lawlessness becomes a reflex and a mode of survival.
Indeed.
So that when we talk about Jamaica as a society in which we can see a culture of violence from then till now, you can actually trace how it is even in the very mechanisms to ensure rule of law, there is lawlessness.
But you opened that gate, so let me go right through that gate. The mechanisms, all of the structures of the society, and certainly, of course, even within the cultures and subcultures of the society. So what say you to the music that we listen to in the society?
So if it is that you have a foundation that's built on a culture of violence, rooted in violence, forged in violence, violence becomes your reflex, violence becomes your way to survive, how then are you going to have music that reflects something different? How then are you going to have any kind of, or films? People were complaining about the fact that our films, the dominant Jamaican films on the international platform, even as far back as the holiday comes, gun violence, knife violence, right?
You talk about the deeds of discipline. Deans of disciplines, no fault of theirs. The system that the Ministry of Education and the government and everybody from way back when implement is a system that oppresses young people. And so you can't talk about discipline when you treat people like they're animals, especially when they're young kids. And these young kids are being exposed in different ways from when most of us used to
But
grow.
I put it to you, if it is that this is what they're exposed to in the society, should the school not implement ways of ensuring that there is
so this
let me hear what Dr. Brown has to say on that. Yes.
A lot of our issues are systemic, so let's look at it from a systemic perspective, a culture of violence. We're talking about children who are growing up in places that they're seeing. I spoke to one of my students recently. He saw his friend shot off a bicycle right in front of him. Why? Argument over goats. Now, how do we have, when we have a classroom filled with children who witness it directly, whose parents witness it, who are dealing with this kind of grief? We see movies all the time where, you know, the father has left, so the child is acting out, right? But for some reason, we don't seem to apply that to the realities of our children, whose mothers, fathers, uncles, grandfathers, great-grandfathers, because this is not just yesterday or today or since we born, or Dr. Howard or Dr. Stanley Nayo. It's been there long before. Now, if you look at even the context where Rygin, which is the harder that came, how he even emerged and how Rygin, the real life character, came from country, naive, everything like that. And what did the system do to him? How did he respond to it? Right? And when you look at even how the police force in Jamaica came to be, it did not come to be as to protect the lives and the dignity of all people. It came to protect
Suppress
the
those
property.
who are-
Not
Yeah.
a service, of course.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And to protect private
No,
property.
Let's
and
go
private
into our
property
legal
rights.
system. We're still updating it. Not everyone has equal rights before the law.
Absolutely.
No, when you go into things like people, I'm a mother going into the hospital. You're focusing more on whether or not my shoulders. How do you expect me
Exposed.
to respond to it? I am traumatized.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you're putting trauma on me by saying, my child who was shot, I need to wear something proper.
Before you can attend.
I need to borrow a
Yes.
shawl to cover up.
Right, right.
For what?
You know, when you come into the schools now, we're talking about deans of discipline.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, there are other ways. We're talking about Zozo. No, everything that we do, we respond to it in ways that look from master to servant.
Yeah.
Coercion.
So it's the same system that we have, the
Exactly.
same plantation
Now let's
structure
look at
that
the
was-
same
yes.
people in different countries handling the same things.
Right.
The way we talk about when black people do crime, lock them up. When black people do drugs, lock them up. When another race does drugs, let's open up
It's a health problem.
the health problem. Let's call
Right,
let's
right.
have places-
Rehabilitation.
Rehabilitation.
Right.
So let's continue.
We don't do any kind of systemic rehabilitation.
Right, right.
So how are we going to expect children to respond when from the parents to the grandparents, every aspect of their life is clouded in this
Yeah.
kind of legacy?
And when we talk
violence?
about discipline, you know,
Yeah.
we are talking about a punitive
kind of
discipline
Right,
and,
right.
and kind of
Enforcement.
conformity.
Yes.
It is not about
Watch my
industrious discipline
Right.
to work hard,
Right.
to be consistent at what you do.
to
Conformity.
be loving to each
And
other.
thank you.
Yeah.
And I prefer a dean of discipline
Yes.
instilling that kind of attitude to somebody instead of sometimes physically
Or-
dealing
or-
with
or-
people
can I
and
say-
berating people.
All right, I think I want us to continue down that same road
Yeah.
of solutions
All
because
right,
that's where I hear that we are going.
No,
Which
but-
is exactly
right?
where I wanted
Yes,
to go.
I hear that we're going there, and I'm thinking that perhaps even the term dean of discipline
That's
is
where I was
something that
going.
we
Problematic.
want to
Problematic.
change.
Why not a dean of care and
Of
support?
wellness.
All right.
Or
Yeah.
dean of wellness.
So,
exactly.
so we need to change the narrative in the very first
Yes,
place,
that's
and then
correct.
that will also
A
help
culture shift.
a culture shift
is necessary.
altogether. So
Yeah.
let's go back to you, Dr. Naya, because you mentioned some solutions at the very beginning in terms of not just mitigation, but we are where we are. It is what it is. How do we move forward? What do we do now? Should we continue to say that the structures are in place and so people are simply reflecting what it is that has been done? What do we do now? From whichever perspective, whether community or policy or individual, what would you suggest that we need to do now?
So one of the most important things that I want to establish is that our conversation must not be taken in totality thus far to be negative, because there are schools
Yes.
that are doing some fantastic things, students coming out of various schools
Indeed.
that are not exhibiting,
Indeed.
traits of violence and so on. But we do have a crime and security problem in the region, and Jamaica is on various lists for all kinds of things, topping murder rates, topping all kinds of things, femicide rates and so on. Solutions, though, would have to be rooted in a culture shift. And culture can't be changed overnight,
Not at
because we
all.
never got here overnight.
That's right.
So one of the things that I am particularly interested in is one of the things is the way in which our schools are going to return to places where students can have freedom of expression, and that expression channeled in some very distinctive ways, things that have in fact distinguished Jamaica on an international scale. Why is it that Jamaica's largest export, being cultural,
Yes.
is not something that we have chosen to root in schools?
That's right.
The Ministry of Education has a music program. There are people inside of the Ministry of Education that have music and music in schools as part. Culture in schools, culture program. But there are no teachers in schools routinely to carry through
those programs.
That
Yes.
is one of our solutions,
Yes,
because if you have outlets
For
for your energy,
indeed.
in whatever way, shape, or form, you're not gonna have that energy to be violent. Channel the violence or whatever that energy is, because it is only energy.
I absolutely agree. As a teacher in the classroom for nearly 12 years, I have seen where that works. And I come from a school in the country where it's almost as if once you walk through those gates, it said extracurriculars begin here. Like there's an invisible sign. And so there are a million things to do, and I got involved in a million things. And I tell people all the time that with the kind of background that I came from, I believe that I am more the person I am today because of the involvement in those million and one things, the music and the speech and drama and the debating and all of these things.
So
but unfortunately, I have worked in a space, more than one spaces, where that is not the focus, as you said, and it's the academics.
Because it's the colonial consensus. It's the colonial consensus.
So the lawyer, doctor, in their chief,
to follow up on what Dr. Naya
yes.
is saying, we are a society, we're still in a colonial mind frame, and we're talking about certain aspect of our education and the privilege that side. We have never privileged culture, which is our superpower, which is our competitive advantage. You see? And so we need to understand that, listen, somebody just, a young person was asking me, who is Harry Belafonte? you get the point?
Yes.
That's the point, because we are not implementing the kind of programs and policies to root culture within our society and develop it. We don't even have
culture as a reflex.
It's the shift.
We don't have a performing arts high school.
It's the shift.
Performing arts high school. Why we don't have one?
It's the shift that Dr. Dye is saying, really. It's the shift. It's the mind shift. Because there are some things in place, but if there's not a
systemic.
Shift, well, that is true.
Not systemic.
And if it is that, people are not understanding that this is where we need to go, then you're not going
to do it.
But
the students are telling us every day that that's where they want to go.
That's what they want to do.
They know the songs. The lines of the songs faster than they know the biology.
They do. So let's talk some more solutions.
One of the issues is that we have turned to a kind of education as a service industry kind of thing. Let's prepare them to come and do a work. And when I was going to high school, education, there was a strong reflective component. So there was the history, there was civics, there was literature, right? These kinds of things that urge you to sit, to read, to reflect, to think about who am I, where do I fall in this, who am I becoming, what can I become, how do I stand in relation to those who were. That's a very important point. Now, if you're looking for solutions, you have to look for solutions in context. And so context can only come from, there's a historical context, there's a cultural context, there is a literary context, and none of that context is really being, when I was Deputy Dean for Marketing and Outreach, everywhere I went, there was science, a lot of business.
Yes.
Right? Science and business. And that was a lot of the schools. And so the result is that while these are important in their own ways, there's a culture, there's an expression, but there's a reflection. Now, in terms of solution, I think systemically. If the system that we inherited was one that was violent, then it has to be deliberately replaced by a system. It doesn't have to be, it's not going to be overnight. But you can start. Replace deans of discipline with, say, dean of wellness. What does wellness incorporate?
Yes.
Not just wellness incorporates your cultural expression. Wellness incorporates physical health, and we're not just talking running.
Right.
They're shown, even in Jamaica, schools that incorporate breathing, meditation, and yoga techniques, right? That the children are better for it.
You're sounding a little foreign there now, Nicole, and many persons may be saying, where's she going with this yoga and that kind of thing, because we are as Jamaicans.
Is yoga really foreign though?
I
consider our very, the very
history.
Exactly.
Yes.
There, in fact, one of the things that we've even forgotten about, there is a West African martial arts that influences capoeira in Brazil. So we
don't know our history.
exactly.
That's
Yes,
part
that is
Right?
part of the
So-
challenge.
So
Yes.
the things that I'm emphasizing are not necessarily things that are foreign. They sound foreign.
They sound-
but
no,
they
absolutely.
are not.
Yes.
So I'm glad you brought up the yoga, because that is an example now. If you look to the east, China, India, these are spaces in which children go to school. Japan, and the very culturally embedded practices that allow you to do that self-reflection that you brought up earlier is so key. And we don't have that in our schools. We don't have that in our schools.
Exactly.
And we might be removed from an understanding of a contemporary yoga. But is it dance? Is it music? Is it something else?
Exactly.
That we can be culturally rooted,
Yes.
and understand
And
that it is part
bear
of the
in
way
mind
we
that the
encourage
countries,
expression.
the examples that you gave are performing very well in the medicine, the law, the
And
this,
all
that,
of those things.
and they're still, and ask them about their history, they're able to tell
They
you.
are.
Absolutely.
Ask them about,
Dynasties,
they are rooted.
Yes.
And so, you know, one of the things about rootedness is that it connects you to people. I don't have to know you
Yeah. Right.
to know that I'm a member of your community, and I treat you with that inherent respect. And so I will wrap up there to
Yes.
say
Yes.
that if any solution must be rooted in us.
There are many things we could talk about here today. The conversation has to continue because we have to end here. And we could and we should talk about Garvey and his work and how important that could be for us as a people if we are to really deal with this issue of this culture of violence. So this is where we end it for today. Thank you, panelists, for being here. Thank you, Dr. Nair, Dr. Plummer, and Dr. Howard. It has been a rich conversation. This has been Cultural Studies in Focus. Until next time, walk good. I'm Melissa Bedford Simpson, your host for today.